Great. So welcome you all to the Stream Around the Clock conference, We Need a Change, organized by FORMWELT Institute in cooperation with Leanbase, the largest platform for lean and agile organization in Germany. I will present this conference today, and I will make sure that every one of you will have the same space and time to share your opinions and ideas. Before you start, I'd like to give you a very short introduction to my person. With my company, which is named Participation Rocks, and as a working out loud coach, I am supporting organizations to develop participatory learning and working settings. And I organize and conduct bar camps and interactive events. And that's one of the reasons why I'm very, very grateful that I can make a contribution to this event thanks to Gitta. One point which is maybe, but you may correct me, Gitta, hidden agenda is about the four currents of our time, which all are required to solve the problems and the challenges we are facing. And so that was actually very important for this conference to bring people from all of these four currents together and make them get into a dialogue and get into a conversation, because together we may be possible to solve the challenges and the problems we face. And before we really start with the program, just some words about the FORMWELT Institute, which is organizing this event. The aim of FORMWELT Institute is to promote specialized, renewing, innovative research projects and applications within and from the fields of humanities, systems theory, and scientific and mathematical theory of complex systems. The main focus and central motive of their work is the development and construction of bridges in space and time, in communication and mind to carry both science and humanities into the future, to evaluate achievements effectively, to critically analyze what needs to be provided, and shape the world in an active cooperation. And there's a link below this text, so if you are interested in getting more information on the FORMWELT Institute and FORMWELT, you may just click on this or enter it to your browser. Okay, so this is the agenda for the next 3 hours. And we are dealing with the topic Augmented Humanity, Opportunity or Threat. And me personally, I hope I learn a bit about what it really is, this kind of augmented humanity, before you show me your ideas or opinions, whether it's an opportunity or threat, or maybe both. Before we start, I'd like to introduce the guests, all the guests, with a few sentences so everybody knows who's around here, who is speaking. And I'd start with David Wood, who will hold the keynote. David Wood comes from a pioneering career in the smartphone industry. Today, he is chairman of the London Futurists, a meetup dedicated to the discussion of a likely impact of technology on human experience. He is also director at the Transhumanist UK party, campaigning to changing the political landscape to including the insights of transhumanism. He has written 6 books and edited many more. He lives in London, UK. David says about himself that he has been carrying a smartphone in his shirt pocket since 1999. That is for 21 years. Not the same smartphone, of course. We are wondering, the same shirt? Okay, maybe we will get an information by David later on this. Next one is Nikola Danaylov. Nikola is author, futurist, and speaker. His Conversations with the Future is an international bestseller, and his popular Singularity FM podcast is the reason why Danaylov has been called the Larry King of the Singularity. I very much like the questions Nikola triggers in his LinkedIn profile. What if your car doesn't need a driver anymore? What if we don't need to age and die? What if machines get smarter than us? What if your toothbrush gets smarter than you? What happens to your business? What happens to you? Because no matter who you are or what you do, the future will always find you. Question is, will you find the future? Next, Michael Healy, who has joined us right now. Great. Hello, Michael. Michael is a self-taught full-stack web developer and mobile engineer for iPhone and Android, and is focused on social impact and positive change through education, entrepreneurship, and empowering individuals. Michael was a finalist of the Thiel Fellowship by Peter Thiel, and also awarded the silver medal in the Mathematics Olympiad. Michael has served as entrepreneur in residence at top pan-European venture capital firm Wellington Partners. He has done work for Google, KPMG, Founders Forum, Saatchi & Saatchi, L'Oreal, Imperial College, Unilever, London Business School, and others. Hello, Michael. Let me just have a look if David Pearce already joined us. Not yet. So I will introduce David when he has joined. Then next, and then I have to stop. I have to stop this one. Just 1 second. So now next is Gitta Peyn. Gitta Peyn is a German system and cybernetics researcher, co-developer of the linguistic system of FORMWELT and the polyvalent logic of cognition Weltform. She's also an international FORMWELT speaker, co-founder of the FORMWELT Institute, and recently became panel member of the ongoing UN WAAS World Academy of Art and Science Conference, Strategies for Transformation Leadership. Gitta loves stracciatella ice cream, but she doesn't have any with her today. And she lives in Lüchow in Germany. Well, and last but not least, Yonah Welker. Yonah's mission is to co-create ventures, technologies, and moonshots which reimagine ability, education, well-being, diversity, and human potential. He has started his path in 2005 when he launched a hardware tech think tank. Over his journey, he founded and worked on tech companies, and labs, paired technology and art, helped to facilitate tech ecosystems. He explores, co-creates, connects, and influences, which sounds pretty interesting. I thought I was seeing David Pearce joining us, but maybe he immediately left. Okay, so we will see if he will manage to get in.
I'm writing an email to him right now.
Okay, I saw him. He was asking to be allowed to enter, and I allowed him.
Okay.
But
also,
then
his internet connection is unstable, and that could happen when that's the case.
Yeah, you mean my connection?
No, his connection.
Yes. Okay. So I will keep on, and we will see to get him into this room. Michael, any question? Because your hand is still up.
No, that's perfect. I'm looking forward. Thank you.
Okay. So then we would like to start with David's keynote. Afterwards, and David, you will have 20 minutes. Would that be okay for you? 25, we can make a deal.
Well, I don't think I'll speak quite that long, but we'll
Great.
see where the inspiration takes me.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And afterwards, the panel guests are invited to share their ideas and opinion to this topic and, of course, to David's keynote. And each of you will have about 5 minutes time, maybe 6, depends on what you pay me later, maybe 7 minutes. And we will do this in alphabetical order of the last name. So just feel free to make note, take notes, or share our thoughts later on. And now, David, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Martin, and all the organizers. Since there was a brief mention of ancient smartphones from 1999, I did look for that phone of mine, the Ericsson R380. I think it's deep inside a box in my garage. I found, however, this one, the small Nokia 3650 from 2002. What's surprising is how small it is and also how heavy it is. You know, the technology has miniaturized and improved it. So this was my third brain at the time. I also had a second brain, which was this Cyan personal computer. It helped to keep me wise and augmented at that time. This one I do keep in my jacket pocket for 21 years or so. But I want to talk not about smartphones, important that that was in my life. I want to talk about smart people or augmented people. Let me share the right slides here. Share. And so, indeed, Martin's already given the answer to this question. When we're talking about augmenting humanity using technology, is that something good or something bad? Is it an opportunity or is it a threat? And the answer is it is both. And the real question is, how can we maximize that opportunity whilst minimizing and taking care of the threats? So what are we talking about in terms of augmenting ourselves? It starts with a recognition that we are often not as good, as effective, as human as we would like to be, but there are possibilities for us to improve in numerous areas. Sometimes we're not as creative as we would like. Sometimes we're not as focused as we would like. Sometimes we tend to get locked into seeing things just from our own perspective, and it would be better if we could see things from other people's points of view too, boosting our empathy and our compassion. Sometimes it would be better if we had improved memory. We forget things too often, and even important lessons that we wish we would learn somehow get forgotten as well. And by the way, when I'm saying we, in terms of what we might want to augment, of course, it's about improving ourselves as individuals. It will also be much better for society if our political leaders were in some ways augmented, and if all members of society were more human and less prone to various defects, which we have inherited. Defects such as our irrationality. Just as our memory is often deficient, our rationality is often hijacked by what people call cognitive biases. Things like a status quo bias, or an anchoring bias, or a short-term bias. In fact, Wikipedia has lists of, I think, more than 100 cognitive biases, and they all made sense of a sort in evolutionary times when we were in the Neolithic age. But these ways of thinking are often inappropriate and dangerous in our present time. Can we augment ourselves not to fall prey to these cognitive biases? What about being free from negative emotional spasms when we sometimes get taken away by anger, resentment, bitterness, depression? There's surely a role in a human character for anger and resentment and some depression, but often there's too much of it and it prevents us from thinking clearly. As in the words of the famous song, when your heart's on fire, smoke gets in your eyes. Can we be free from such smoke more often? Can we be free from other addictions that were, by the way, discussed in the previous rather fascinating session in this stream around the clock. Can we improve our self-awareness so we deceive ourselves less often? We deceive each other when we also deceive ourselves. Sometimes it would be better if we had more self-knowledge. Can we augment ourselves that is possible? And can we augment ourselves to be more sociable? Not just thinking about other people's points of view, but generally being kinder, more inviting, and less egocentric. So I claim, and we can discuss this later, that broadly, all of these things would be good and in fact are critical to be improved if we keep on going with our current level of humanity with these flaws unfixed. We are likely to use the more powerful technology of today and tomorrow in ways that are detrimental and destructive. We may become stronger. We may become more intelligent. We may become more powerful because of that technology, but we will be likely to do bad things with that technology. Our greater power will lead to greater corruption unless our intelligence is matched by wisdom, unless we are truly intelligent as augmented in these ways. Well, that's my wish list, and we can discuss that wish list later. But how might we go about augmenting ourselves in these and other aspects? Well, we've been doing this throughout our entire history as a species. We've had various forms of education, whether it's formal education or informal education. People have written accounts of the lives of admirable people, whether they were saints or mystics or prophets or in other ways people who lived for others. And we have studied that and we have tried to internalize it. There has been meditation and prayer, ways in which we have sought to improve ourselves in these kind of inner contemplation. There has been physical activity too, whether it's yoga, which there is some evidence can improve not just our physical well-being, but our mental and spiritual well-being. Other physical activities such as dance and sport, likewise. And then there's counseling such as in the priest's confessional box. In more recent times, counseling from people trained in psychology, counseling from our good friends who can often point things out to us, counseling by our most intimate and trusted colleagues and friends. Then there is guided hypnotism, there is guided meditation, there is guided lucid dreaming. And here I'm starting to move beyond what's been possible in the past to what's increasingly possible in the present and near future. There is the possibility to stimulate our brains by music, which can change our mood, and if the music is right, can make us better people, at least in the short term. But there is other ways to stimulate our brain, which are increasingly studied, such as little helmets, which can apply direct electrical current, or other kinds of electromagnetic variation. There can be light shined up the nose, which some people claim will improve their mental well-being. There is the whole field of substances. I'm not just talking about what we might eat. There is caffeine, which sometimes improves our ability to concentrate. There is alcohol, which I'm told can occasionally make people more creative. And then there are various other drugs, whether they are psychedelic drugs or nootropic drugs, such as Adderall and other things which are still being developed, which could improve our brain functioning. Then there are devices, such as the things I was showing earlier, the smartphones, the personal digital assistants, but increasingly there is a whole bunch of information technology at our shoulders, almost inside our heads. As we write emails, we are guided often towards better spelling, better grammar. Increasingly, we get advice on the kinds of style by which we should talk to people. There are other devices such as virtual reality headsets, which can help us to see from somebody else's point of view. It can give us a visceral feeling, which can augment our intellectual understanding of a situation, give us a kick in the solar plexus, as it were, and help us to take a better point of view. And there are devices called augmented reality, in which we have glasses of various sorts. Now, these have not been as successful yet as some people thought, including me 10 years ago, when I thought in 2010 that by now, 2020, smart glasses would be near ubiquitous. They haven't become good enough yet. Just as my early smartphone was too heavy, some of the earlier smart glasses have had their own usability issues, but sooner or later, we're going to have more augmented reality. I look at the Microsoft HoloLens as a great example. You see the reality from the physical world, but you see mixed in information, which can help you. It can give you advice on the screen. Then there is biotechnological change that possibly by reprogramming, not our devices, but reprogramming ourselves, reprogramming our genetics, or possibly tweaking our epigenetics, or reprogramming our biome. That's the set of small creatures that are in our gut, in our skin, and elsewhere. There are other biotechnological changes that might make us better people. Sometimes there is word of designer babies. Well, I'm also interested in redesigning myself and people who are alive. And this is more than just giving us vaccinations and antibiotics, things which have traditionally improved or augmented our biology. This could be augmenting all these fields around the side. And last but not least, we can augment our capabilities by changing our environment, possibly by going into beautiful parts of nature forests, and so on. Partly by changing the social media environment so we are not bombarded by unhelpful messages, partly by restricting or freeing ourselves from consumerist advertising. And then there's the mental environment. What are the stories that we tell ourselves, the things that we mutter under our breath, the ideas that we may have picked up in childhood as to what we should do and what we should be? These can sometimes be very unhelpful. They can sometimes be very helpful. So there is plenty of scope for augmenting ourselves, but you are surely already thinking, oh, some of this could have drawbacks. And indeed, let's now speak for a bit about what could go wrong with personal human augmentation. And for one thing, there could be unexpected side effects of various treatments, just as some drugs which can be given to treat some illness can have bad side effects which are even worse than the thing the drug was trying to fix. We might, for example, try to make ourselves more focused, but we might end up less creative as a result. We might try to expand our mind with various drugs and substances, but lose touch with reality. We might, in the final extreme, make ourselves much smarter by uploading our brains potentially onto silicon computers, but somehow leave behind our consciousness. So the world might end up with smarter copies of ourselves with no inner life. That would be a big, bad, unexpected side effect. And then there's the risk of loss of control. Education sometimes has bad side effects because people are brainwashed into a set of ideas. They are misled by what they hear in their classes. We can be manipulated by our counselors, whether it's our priests or our psychologists or our close friends who we trust, and maybe we shouldn't be trusting them. We could be especially manipulated by the owners of the information that flashes up on our screens or later, perhaps, in our heads when we don't just have smart glasses, but we have possibly implants in our brains, such as Elon Musk's Neuralink company may provide for us. It would be very bad if the advice that came to us appeared to be on our side, but actually was dedicated to making various companies more powerful or various political parties more dominant. And there's a third way in which there could be drawbacks to human augmentation. We might have even more diversity than is already in place, a diversity which causes some people already deep concern. I believe we should cope with diversity, but maybe there will be a chaotic diversity. And in the worst extreme, there is the scenario which the historian and futurist Yuval Noah Harari talks about, a bifurcation of the human species into people who are essentially like gods, the near gods, because of the power that they possess, and the mainly useless, people who have nothing to contribute and who are left behind. So we have to be careful with every kind of augmentation that there could be unintended bad social consequences. So Every time people have talked about augmenting, there have been naysayers. When we learnt reading and writing, a famous philosopher at the time, Socrates, said it was a bad idea, and he deplored reading and writing. He much preferred that people would memorize things in their physical brains. But gradually we have seen, actually, it is useful to be able to read and write. There have been many other criticisms of what might happen with augmenting ourselves, and they are, in many cases, valid criticisms. But that doesn't stop us. We don't stop all education just because there are some bad uses of education. We don't stop all use of drugs because sometimes people have bad uses of drugs. We need to grow smarter. And that moves me on to the harder question. How do we decide which of these possible treatments we should be prioritizing and promoting, and which of them should have big warning signs and possibly be forbidden or made illegal? How do we decide that? Where the possibility is that we can reach up into augmented status, what I call humanity 2.0 or humanity plus, there is also the risk that we might deeply regret subsequently what we are doing to ourselves and each other. So we will need the best of today's humanity, by which I mean the best scientific understanding as to the extent of the plasticity of the brain, the contributants and determinants of human nature, to what extent they can be changed. We need to have a broad appreciation from multiple diverse cultural points of view, contributing to the discussion as to which parts of our human nature should be left behind and which should be retained despite initial apprehension. It probably is good that we do get angry from time to time, that we are random from time to time, but and that there is stress from time to time, but they are at a bad imbalance today. How do we decide the extent? We will need also imagination, creative imagination from the artists and broader poets in the community, not just to think about what has been in the past, but to think about the new ways possible, think about the new dangers that might emerge and also the new wonderful possibilities. We need to paint multiple scenarios, and then we need to be collectively wise, thinking things through. We've been imaginative, then we need to apply our critical thinking to decide which of these scenarios really should be pursued. And once we made up our minds, then we should go step by step, irreversibly if possible, in case it turns out that things didn't go as we expected. We should be monitoring the results and, where necessary, learning from what we have discovered, doing it in an agile and lean way. And in all of this, ultimately, we need to be guided by a set of values and philosophy. And in my final remarks, I want to talk about how we're going to decide, and I'm going to recommend a particular philosophical point of view called transhumanism, which I will introduce as one way of answering the question, which way should we go? Where science and technology make things possible, and where we might feel inclined to do these things, sometimes there are bigger reasons against going down that route. That's what ethics is about. There have been 4 broad answers to how to decide. For most of history, we took it for granted that there were wise prophets who had been in communion with the gods, and they came down with great advice as to how we should live and not live. And they told us, don't commit adultery, don't eat shellfish, get circumcised, women should cover their hair in church, and so on. And for most of history, that dominated, but we have now learned that there is far too much relativism in that. And so we are still inspired from time to time by the writings of these ancient people. We now very strongly interpret them from a human lens, which I'll come to in the meantime. But as the certainties of religious guidance have fallen away, we still have a need for a system to guide us in our choices. The second set has been to say, look at nature. Look at the harmony in nature. Look at the balance that's in nature. That's what we should be following too. Let's apply principles of natural living, yin and yang. But frankly, as we have looked more closely at nature, and if David Pearce is here, I'm sure he will make this point, there is a great deal of ugliness in nature. There is a great deal of nature red in tooth and claw. As we see the things that are called bright and beautiful, there are many ugly and terrible things. In fact, for most of history, what nature did is it killed people far too young. Half the people who ever lived arguably have died from a single disease, malaria. We should not take nature for granted. So that leads us to the dominant 21st century or 20th century philosophy, which is humanism, to say we humans, we've got to make our own decisions. We are going to take decisions to respect all around human well-being, and the guidance isn't ultimately any holy book or looking at nature. Of course, we look at these things to feed into our decisions. We discuss in our community, but ultimately we decide, and we don't put undue faith in any one authority, and we don't place nature on a pedestal either. So I am a humanist, but more than that, I am a transhumanist. I take all these humanist principles as a starting point, but transhumanism goes further. And sometimes indeed the symbol H+ is used to describe transhumanism for exactly that point of view. And here I'm showing the symbol of probably the world's premier transhumanist organization, Humanity Plus. It says the human species in its current form does not represent the end of our development, but a comparatively early phase. So we should not put existing human nature on a pedestal. We should approach the intelligent redesign of human nature, and in due course, the intelligent redesign of the broader ecosystem. So my summary is we can wisely augment ourselves. New possibilities from science and technology are accelerating what we can do, rather than spending 30 years under a banyan tree, gradually getting enlightenment. Some of these methods can get us there a heck of a lot faster, and that is not cheating. That is the wise and sensible thing to do, so long as we have checked out in advance about possible side effects. If we do not augment ourselves, I think that we will mishandle today's technology and end up in a very bad state indeed. Thank you very much for coming through that set of ideas. Looking forward to discussing what we should be prioritizing, what we should be guarding against, and how we can be making decisions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, David. That was very interesting, having a deep insight in various kinds of augmenting our humanity or ourselves, and maybe the hint that it should be done wisely, which, well, gives enough space for discussion, I think. Meanwhile, David Pearce has joined us as well. Hi, David.
Hi.
I will introduce you with some sentences as soon as you are invited to comment on the other David's keynote. But we will do it in alphabetical order. So I would invite Nikola now to start with an answer or with his ideas on what David shared with us.
Martin,
Yeah.
maybe some introduction for David Pearce, or will you do that later?
Yes, I will introduce him when it's his step. So after Michael Healy.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So there's an ancient Greek myth about one of our first and most powerful technologies. The story goes that the Titan Prometheus took pity on humanity's weak and defenseless bodies. So he decided to augment us. And it was for this reason that Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gifted it to us. This, of course, angered Zeus, who punished Prometheus terribly by chaining him to a mountain rock where a huge eagle would feast on Prometheus's liver every day. Now, most people know that myth, but they don't know Plato's version. According to Plato, Zeus didn't get angry at Prometheus for giving us fire. According to Plato, Zeus punished Prometheus so harshly because fire actually ended up harming humanity more than it helped us. Because fire represented technological knowledge, which of course gave us enormous power. But the problem was that the good Titan Prometheus forgot to grant us or to gift us with wisdom as per why, when, and how we should best utilize the power of fire. And so giving humankind knowledge without wisdom was like giving kids matches to play with. And the story as told by Plato is that humanity, it got so bad that humanity started destroying ourselves. And eventually, Zeus himself was compelled to help us because he felt sorry for us, and he had to intervene by sending us the wisdom that we lacked. But the damage was already done, and the Titan Prometheus had to pay the price. Thus, the generous Titan found that powerful technology such as fire is not the same thing as progress, since giving us power without knowledge or wisdom can be actually a very, very dangerous thing. Well, today, our technology has become infinitely more powerful than fire, and it gives us an abundance of knowledge. But it is still uncertain if we have wisdom, and many people would say that if you look at the world as it is today, it would appear that we have profound scarcity of wisdom. And if that's true, then our advanced technology may turn out like giving children nuclear weapons. And so in the long run, it seems to me that it is still unclear if technology in general, and especially Silicon Valley in particular, would save or destroy the world. What is clear, however, is that to answer the question whether augmented humanity is an opportunity or it is a threat, we have to answer the question whether humanity itself is an opportunity or whether humanity itself is a threat. Because technology is a mirror that reflects who we are. It is a mirror because it reflects the engineers, the designers, and the programmers who make it. But it is also a mirror to humanity in general and to all of our collective dreams, hopes, and fears, our knowledge and our ignorance, our strengths and our weaknesses, our good and also our evil. But it is not a normal kind of a mirror, because technology tends to magnify and amplify things up. So it always has unforeseen consequences. So the key point here, however, is that technology does not have an essence of its own, because it merely takes on and reflects our essence. So instead of focusing and improving the mirror, which merely reflects our essence, it may be better to actually focus on the image that we ourselves are projecting in the mirror. That is to say, who we are being, what we are doing, and why we are doing it. Therefore, ultimately, it is not about technology. Ultimately, it is about us. It is not about being augmented. It is about being human. Then, even if we are not augmented, but if we're merely human, we can still make some positive, even if non-exponential or simply linear impact on our world. But if we get the being part wrong, if we get the human part wrong in that augmented humanity, and if we rush into getting exponential and augmented, then we can destroy not only ourselves, but the whole world around us. So I hope that it is clear that focusing on being augmented is not just meaningless, it is outright dangerous. And my concern that we're putting the stress on the wrong word within augmented humanity is not mere semantics. Being augmented is merely a means to an end. In fact, all technology is but a means to an end. It is never an end in itself. And we hopefully want to be augmented so that we can do more, we can be more, we can help more, and we can give more. But to evaluate whether augmenting humanity is an opportunity or a threat, we have to answer a number of questions relating to the question whether humanity itself is an opportunity or a threat. Questions such as, a threat to whom? How do we measure that? An opportunity to whom? How do we measure that? And until we get some clarity and consensus on those questions, we are going to be a lot more of a threat than an opportunity. Not only to others, but also, unfortunately, to our own selves. Because if we look carefully at all the problems that we're facing today, we would realize that they're all the same exact problem over and over again. So things like nuclear proliferation, global warming, environmental degradation, soil erosion, climate change, species extinctions are one and the same problem repeating itself all over the world. And this is this: humanity's technological power far surpassing our wisdom and our ability to control it. So I want to leave you with two quotes. The first one is from Zora Hurston from a book called Tell My Horse. And it goes like this: gods always behave like the people who make them. And the second quote is from Yuval Noah Harari from Sapiens, and it's the last sentence in his book. And he says, quote, "Is there anything more dangerous than dissatisfied and irresponsible gods who don't know what they want? Question mark. Do we know what we want?" Thank you.
Okay, that's what I expected from you. I'm sorry, putting questions. Thank you, but very important. And I learned it yesterday already that your questions are very helpful to get deep in the discussion on such things. Thank you very much, Nikola. And next would be Michael Healy.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, I was super inspired and impressed, I think, with David's talk and what the points that Nikola brought up. I think several really interesting points are the influence of technology within and the influences of technology from the external point of view. And then I'll also like to touch on maybe practices David mentioned, like meditation or yoga, as well as supplements, which further enhance the human experience and allows for people to have a greater human experience, whether it's personal connections with other people or whether it's improving peak performance and yeah, I'd love to touch on that. With regards to technology, I think what we've found, like what David mentioned with smartphones over the past 10, 15 years, as well as the internet, it's provided this extension of the human body and a way for people to access information which they wouldn't otherwise have. I think David mentioned the point about Socrates, who made a point about writing and recording versus memorizing. And I think, like, if you look at the internet, what it's allowed is this vast array of information to be documented and shared all across the world, where anyone has access to this repository of information. And then the mobile phone came out and it allowed humans to basically communicate with people all across the world and share this information on a very individual level. So I'm super excited about how technology has progressed from providing information to people. I'm super excited how things like the mobile phone and the smartphone have allowed people to communicate and keep in touch. I'm really excited for how technology continues to develop to further enhance the human's experience and connections with others. What I'm mindful of is if the technology is able to improve the human experience without taking away the humanness of it. So if you think of people and purpose and the why of why people exist or what people fundamentally want, what I'm worried and mindful of is things like virtual reality, things like social media, I think introduces another realm or another world to people. So if you think of things like Instagram or you think of things like VR, you know, people are basically going into another world. Like even like us in this Zoom conference meeting now, we're basically very, very similar to being in a physical room, and the room outside which we're in doesn't exist for this present moment. And I'm completely fascinated about the idea of thought versus being in presence and how technology relates to that. And with regards to where it's going, like I think one big opportunity for people to leverage and look into and build upon is the ability to support in how people are able to collaborate and work together and serve one another. I think society now has allowed for a world where people are able to communicate with one another, where people are able to maybe document experience with one another, but it's only just the beginning in terms of how people are able to serve one another on an individual level. And what does that really mean? So if you look at different internet platforms, you know, there's many different tools like Uber or Airbnb or platforms where if you want to buy a car or sell something or rent something, there's these tools which basically connect you to others who are looking to fulfill your need. I think we're really at the beginning of this, because I think what technology is going to do is further enhance and accelerate that. It's going to remove a lot of the roles and tasks in society where people are basically serving maybe work which could be automated, and it would basically free up people's time and ability to do things more meaningful, whether it's create music, create art, and we're going to end up with a society where I think artificial intelligence, machines perform a lot of the mundane tasks and allow humans to maybe work 2 days a week or even 1 day a week. And then we go to a question of how we're going to distribute this value. So if machines are doing work from preparing food to serving food to finding you properties to doing almost any task which humans typically do now, how do you distribute the value created? How do you ensure in a scarcity-based society, how do you distribute this this value created? Is it just going to be the current owners in society who have who basically lead and control and get the profit from these big companies, and then currently pay salaries to people who service these big companies? But then when robots take over, when robots and AI and machine learning remove the need for these people, so eventually when salaries are no longer paid out to these employees, what are the employees or people going to do? Like, let's say almost every job gets replaced. How are people going to distribute value? And I think the solution there is where what we're going to see in the very near future is companies and projects and organizations are going to distribute the value created from these organizations very broadly. At the moment, the way society is set up is the creators of an organization. Let's say if the 7 of us here started a company or built an organization, we could have 1/7 of a voting right or 1/7 of an ownership. I think society is going to progress to one where the 7 of us here would have maybe 5% of ownership, and then we'll be leaving a large degree of governance and a large degree of ownership to the employees or to the customers. So, like for instance, we're using this service Zoom, but we're extremely essential to the value of Zoom in the tens of hundreds of billions of dollars, but we don't receive any of that value. And this is going to be a huge problem in the future, because let's say if I'm a supermarket worker, and imagine if every element of the supermarket supply chain gets automated, you know, so from the production of food to the supply chain, so in the trucks, it's a driverless car, to in the supermarket, self-checkout, and there's not a need for a human involved. That's a lot of people who will end up without a job. And I think what we're going to see is the ownership or the value created from an organization like a supermarket, the value created will be distributed amongst the community and the people who shop at the supermarket, who are geographically around it. And I believe the solution to do this is tokens and digital currency. Like, I think the same way the smartphones, when it first came out, I think David shared the very first smartphone, and it's so different to like an iPhone or an Android phone now. The same way when the internet first came out, you couldn't have video conferencing, or you couldn't have Zoom or video streaming. I'm really excited because I think tokens are just showing what's possible with regards to how value can be created and distributed. And I think when value flows around society very seamlessly and fluidly, we're going to end up with one where money doesn't dictate and guide the human experience as much as it does now. And it'll be more of a thing that we look at and go, wow, this is something that just supports and enhances society and helps support ideas. And yeah, I'm really excited for that. So yeah, thank you for letting me share, and I'm excited to listen more and see how I can support. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was interesting to make the link to society and business. Maybe how will we work as augmented employees? And how can we maybe profit from augmentation in our daily lives and in our daily business? So next would be David Pearce. And before I hand you over to the stage, David, I will give us a short introduction on you as well. David Pearce is an independent researcher based in Brighton, UK. In 1995, he wrote an online manifesto, The Hedonistic Imperative, advocating the use of biotechnology to abolish suffering throughout the living world. He has also written on the philosophy of mind and perception, utilitarian ethics, psychopharmacology, life extension, and many, many more, and more speculatively, on a post-human future based on paradise engineering, which sounds very interesting to me. In 1998, in collaboration with Nick Bostrom, David Pearce set up the World Transhumanist Association, which was subsequently rebranded as Humanity Plus. David, your thoughts on the discussion up to now? The stage is yours. And you have to unmute, please.
Unmute David, please unmute David.
Unmute. Testing. Testing. Testing.
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh,
Thank
good,
you.
good. Yeah, essentially, yeah, I'm a transhumanist. I would like to see and tentatively predict a post-human civilization based on essentially the three supers: super intelligence, full spectrum super intelligence, super longevity, that's radical life extension, and not least super happiness. This is the idea that it should be possible to reprogram the biosphere and create life based entirely on gradients of intelligent bliss, i.e. a more civilized signaling system to replace the traditional pleasure-pain axis as we know it today. But just to kick off now, essentially I wanted just to focus on a couple of themes. I mean, clearly we are living right now in the midst of this terrible pandemic. Are we going to learn any valuable lessons? And the particular lesson I would like to focus on is that essentially, if humanity were vegan, we would not have this frightful pandemic that is going to cause millions of lives. Now, I'm not going to embark on a long talk on animal rights and the ethical case for veganism. I'll just note that a pig, for example, is as sentient and sapient as a human toddler, and we routinely treat pigs in ways that would get the perpetrator locked up for life if the victim were human. So this pandemic would not happen if civilization were vegan. Now, it's unrealistic sociologically to use moral argumentation, but the pandemic, I mean, the estimated financial cost, forget about the suffering, is something like, I don't know, 10, 15 trillion dollars plus. And if we were to allocate even a few $100 billion to the development and commercialization of cultured meat products, this would be tremendously cost effective from a narrowly human perspective. I mean, I just do not think we can have we can talk seriously about civilization as long as we are eating each other and treating other sentient beings so barbarically. There was a poll that I didn't believe when I first heard it, but it's been replicated. It was conducted in the States by the Sentience Institute, and people were asked not about vegetarianism or veganism, but would they support the closure of slaughterhouses? And the figure of people who said yes was 47%. And I just didn't believe it. Surely people's cognitive dissonance couldn't be so great. I mean, do they imagine that, you know, when they buy meat products in the supermarket, it's like eating roadkill? But the study has been replicated. And drawing some strands together here, what I would like to see is lobbying for legislation that outlaws factory farms and slaughterhouses, that kicks in, let's say, in the year 2030, a delayed onset, delayed implementation. And that would be a tremendous incentive for firms worldwide to accelerate the development, commercialization of cultured meat and animal products. And this would lead to essentially, it's highly unlikely one would have pandemics like COVID in a vegan world. We won't go into precisely how this coronavirus spread to humans. So that's one specific concrete policy, some good thing I would like to see coming out of this pandemic. The way we treat non-human animals, I would hope that it would lead to a revolution. Perhaps it's naive. Possibly in a few years we'll just go back to treating. We will continue to treat humans and non-humans abysmally, but I would like to think that this could happen. Okay, the second, as I said, I haven't got a structured talk or anything. This is just drawing some themes together. Hundreds of millions of people today are either depressed or pain-ridden, and the negative feedback mechanisms of the hedonic treadmill continue to grind. And if you look back in history, back in the when we were hunter-gatherers, on average, there is no real evidence that the subjective level of well-being or ill-being of people today is actually higher than our ancestors on the African savannah. Two things I would like just to specify now. I think that it would be good if all prospective parents were offered access to pre-implantation genetic screening, counseling, and within a few years, access to genome editing. The first CRISPR babies have been born in most unfortunate circumstances, but nonetheless, the technology is here. Something like the level of pain sensitivity, for example, of your future child can be determined based on even a single gene. And obviously there are hundreds of genes, thousands of alleles implicated in pain processing, but in principle, it's possible. Instead of just the traditional genetic crapshoot, if you think that it's ethically justified to bring more life and potential suffering in the world, to choose the variant of the SCN9A gene, the so-called volume knob for pain of your future child. Now, it would be imprudent to have a nonsense mutation because that abolishes any form of nociception as well as pain. But essentially, it'd be possible to ensure that all future babies have an extremely high pain tolerance characteristic of today's genetic outliers. And in terms of mental pain is much more complicated, but even a handful of genetic tweaks could ensure future humans are blessed with a vastly higher hedonic set point around which they fluctuate in the course of a lifetime. Could things go wrong? All kinds of things could go wrong, but this is the nature of creating new life today. It essentially is, it's genetic roulette. Every child born today is a unique, untested experiment, and in the course of the lifetime, a child today will undergo all manner of terrible suffering, as well as hopefully joys and happiness. But we are now in a position, if we think it is ethically justified, to load the genetic dice in our children's favor. One more point before throwing, well, the discussion open. What about existing humans? I mean, yes, I think we have a duty to make sure that new humans and new life do have high pain thresholds, high hedonic set point, but what about existing people? One of the reasons why so many people are still depressed is that they're essentially, the treatment of depression, for example, is still incredibly unsatisfactory. Most people who try antidepressants don't get full remission. In many cases, I know a tragic number of people who have tried, half a dozen or more antidepressants, nothing works. And it may well be that the reason for this is that hedonic tone, basically whether you feel happy, sad, or neutral, is a function of the opioid system. I mean, recall how people who are given let's say morphine because they're in pain will say such things as, yes, they can still feel the pain, but it doesn't matter anymore. Now, I needn't stress that today's existing opioids are not suitable as antidepressants. I mean, yeah, acutely their effects are wonderful. They banish mental pain, but they have all sorts of side effects. They make people very selfish. They induce tolerance. There's a great opioid crisis in the States. But, and this is the point I'm coming up to, there has been a startling discovery this year, which is a new opioid receptor that wasn't recognized before. It's been discovered by a team at the Luxembourg Institute of Health, the ACKR3 receptor. And this essentially regulates levels of endogenous peptides. I mean, we're all born opioid addicts, dependent on endogenous opioids, and seems one of the main feedback mechanisms in the central nervous system is this newly discovered receptor that traps or sequestrates endogenous opioids. And what this team at Luxembourg Institute of Health have done is they have found an agent. It's probably only going to be the first of many. LIH383 is the name of the new molecule involved, which blocks this receptor and elevates natural levels of opioids in the CNS. And so this, what in principle, at any rate, this will do is enable hedonic uplift perhaps for everyone, but most morally importantly, it promises a new class of therapeutic interventions for chronic pain and depression. I mean, possibly with something like selective kappa antagonists. Kappa is the nasty opioid receptor and so on. I would stress this is extremely, I mean, history of psychopharmacology has had countless false dawns. There are all manner of possible things that can go wrong. But if we aren't prepared to recalibrate the hedonic treadmill, and if we aren't prepared to actually target the neurotransmitter system most directly involved in hedonic tone, then whether we're talking 50 years or 500 years, we're going to be asking, why is there still so much pain and suffering in the world? Because the negative feedback mechanisms of the brain are brutally efficient. I mean, in theory, yes, there are other ways that we can tackle the problem of suffering. I have touched on earlier the possibility of genetic engineering. Then there is the Neuralink route. But the problem with, for example, directly stimulating the pleasure centers is that you then will have something like indiscriminate euphoria and bliss. Whereas what we really want to do as a long-term, I would argue, for a civilization is create life based on information sensitive gradients of well-being. I mean, think what your existing values and preferences are. Simply recalibrating your hedonic treadmill doesn't ask you to give up what your core values and preferences are, though it may lead to changes, but it will improve your default quality of life. And so, yes, I would love to see an accelerated program of research. I mean, there's much more I could talk about, rather than I'll now.
Yes, I'm afraid I have to stop you now, even though it was really very interesting, a really new aspect on health and well-being, and maybe kind of pre-birth augmentation. Interesting stuff to discuss later on. Thank you, David. Next, I would invite Gitta. If you don't want, we can.
No, I think we have a misunderstanding here. I'm just take part in the discussion where I asked a leading question. Yeah, okay. I'm just a listener here.
Okay, fine. So then, last but not least, Yonah, it's up to you to share your ideas about. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First of all, I would love to say it's ideal moment for my talk, because it's truly ideally continue ideas of my colleagues, because David just started talking about antidepressant, and actually I'm ready to confirm that they don't provide actual relief. And the worst thing, in most cases, patients used antidepressant from 1970s. Yeah, we have an AI for smart drug research. We have companies like In Vitro, but it doesn't work. And another thing I would love to mention, Martin said, what we will do with augmented employees. So basically, my talk will be a bit deeper. I will explore ideas of not augmentation as a different tools, but more kind of a inclusive, personalized ecosystems. Also, I try to go deeper from a neurodiversity, mental health, medical perspective, and also from a technology making perspective, because my work is to find researchers who are working on new ideas in social robotics, VR. My work is to help these guys to go to ecosystems like 500 startups to get funding for them. So I was a director of innovation labs, but at the same time, I'm a patient. I'm a patient who actually came through the whole journey of the physical, medical, chemical, and technology experiments on myself. And 13 years old, I'm almost completely bounded education. I was isolated and I had no any perspective in my life. So most of my time, I accumulated ideas what I use today. So for some people, bionic limbs, using decentralized education, it's a kind of a future thing. No, first of all, it already works. And another thing, it's actually not augmentation. It's must think for people like me. For instance, I have a progressive multiple sclerosis. There are people with a severe mental health issues. There are people with autism. And there are some things I would love to underline. First of all, there is no normality. And part of my mission is to reimagine how we see ability and normality, which is what I do on the level of foundation, venture capital, and connecting the dots, but also ethics. For instance, do you know that 2% of people have autism? And there's around 70 types of spectrums of autism. And it's not disorder. It's just type of neurodiversity. It's normal people, but they require completely different kind of ecosystem, education, approach, and social communication. The way how we live and work is completely different. But another interesting thing, and sometimes some people become a bit shocked, 10% of people have a psychopathic traits. So basically they are psychopaths. Some of them go to the political trade, some of them go to the sport and so on. It's a normal people, but they lack empathy. And what was mentioned in the beginning of talk, augmentation, it's a very broad dimension. It's about intelligence, it's about performance, but also it's about how we're able to interact and use empathy, because we know we're not able to build economy without empathy. Another thing, some people believe that since I'm in the world of technology, I'm kind of 100% advocate of technology, and I believe that technology is able to fix everything. So we just need to invest more money to build more venture funds, and it will work. Actually, nope. And I believe that over COVID-19, we explored that very often it simply failed. And specifically, not technology itself, but models we have today, specifically what I call Y Combinator model or Silicon Valley model, and what we typically love to praise like SpaceX and Elon Musk miracle and other things that have a actually very small impact on our life if we go deeper to actual patients, to actual lives, to actual people with Parkinson, Alzheimer, and other things. For instance, as I mentioned before, we have an AI for drug research, but we still use medical things from the 1970s, 1960s. I use it and I know it. Or we have an AI for smart cities notification and analytics, but we fail over COVID-19 to quickly find out where exactly we have a firing of an epidemic. So that's why we failed. We have a technology just on the conferences. Another thing I would love to mention, what one of the biggest shifts I see today in terms of augmentation movement is a correlation, this such movement like neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is a concept. Their neurological differences are recognized and respected as a kind of a human variation, not a disorder. And currently, we have many discussions in order to go further. For instance, you can find the discussions. Is neurodiversity is mostly about autism? For instance, we have a schizoid personality disorder. Is a mental health issue, or we have a schizophrenia. There is some people who believe that schizophrenia in the same spectrum in autism, but in much deeper. So there are different opinions, and we still have no the same conclusion how exactly we see normality. Who is normal? Who is not? So basically, it's what they're working on today. We're working on social robotics for kids with autism spectrum. We're working on smart glasses which help to understand emotions. I had a brilliant podcast episode with person from Harvard, is a person who worked on mental health and psychiatry over decades, and now he helps young people to understand emotions. It's people with a normal intelligence. We're able to learn, but they're not able to love or make relationships. In other conversation, we explore how small fiction of the ability to have an emotion or understand facial changes help them to find a girlfriend, for instance, and it expand their ability to be more functional human beings. Just small fix and then help them dramatically. Another thing I would love to mention was how we define consciousness and individual self-identification. One of the biggest mistake I've done in my life, I tried to adapt myself to existing ecosystem. For instance, we have a how we see universities, how we see schools, how we see medical service. And I try to adapt myself, go in the same way, but it doesn't work. When I was at school, I was forced to abandon it because, for instance, I explored what I'm not able to learn through listening. but I learned better through writing. I explored what I create and function much better through working remotely or small groups or solely. At the same time, I'm explored what I'm able to work with much bigger amount information in data and with high variety of tasks. So I found what I define as my deep ability is some kind of my narrow psychological and mental pattern would help me to find my narrow superpower. And with what helped me to become a mentor or judge at places like Harvard or MIT without even degree, just working hard in my direction as a technologist, person working in machine learning, data science. Well, decades ago, I was just an outsider. And now I would love to bring another thing to the table. What we should understand Fritz, not of a augmentation, but what will happen if we do nothing towards building inclusive ecosystem, personalized technology, adaptive learning, personalized medical things, or something would help to make a life more organic and more genuine. For instance, do you know what 90% of people with autism are not employed? Even though we have enough intelligence, we have enough skills, we fail. Why? Because, for instance, over recruiting process, we're not able to talk or being expressive enough or be communicative enough, or most of the time they look depressive. So in most cases, people prefer proactive. They prefer some kind of a normal personality. Was what I mentioned before. We have some kind of an ideal of normal people, proactive. This person loves to talk, make friends, and has a tendency to success in traditional meaning. And if you're different, you just fail. In 90% of people with autism just fail. But unfortunately, we have a similar or closer numbers for different kinds of mental states, different types of disability. And that's why, for instance, over the recent few years, we see what I call algorithmic diversity. It's when we build startups, then focus on very narrow type of ability. For instance, we have companies that help people with autism spectrum to find a job in data science. And the whole process of working is adapted to these people. So we're mostly working remotely or in office with similar people. So the whole office and the whole platform is created for such type of people. So there is no problem of a augmented employee. The whole ecosystem is created from scratch for them. And with what we try to create. There is no anymore some kind of a wrong personality. There is a wrong room. There is a wrong tool. There is a wrong platform. Because we can't fix the person. It's burning this way, but we can fix technology. We're able to fix an environment. We're able to change the color of the walls. And that's what we do. And another thing is the social robotics as a type of robotics used in order to add additional value in support to educators working with ADHD youth, autism, or mental health issues, young people, because with type of robots adapted to the particular pace of learning and the way to remember information. And though it's not easy task to promote such type of companies and products, we already see such companies in the US, but at the same time, there are teams in countries like Luxembourg. For instance, I spent a podcast trying to understand what currently we have there. And basically, we see a progress. And my last word, I believe, and is a part of my mission, there is no normality. We should not create augmentation as a tool, but fully inclusive in organics, lives, and ecosystem. Currently, we still have some issues in terms of how it's supported by venture capitalists, ecosystems. It's mostly focused in companies like Instagram, Snapchat, and making some quick money. But hopefully, universities like MIT, Harvard, Oxford are already involved on research, and technology would actually help to change lives for better in organic and smart way.
Wow. Thank you, Yonah, for your very personal insight and your very energetic plea. And I think, again, we have a next aspect we might very well discuss, but we will do so after a short break. We will have not for advertising, but just for bio break now, having a break of 15 minutes. So we will be back. We will meet again at 2:06 in this space, starting with an open discussion between you as a panelists. Thank you and see you soon. And the stream, by the way, the stream will go on. We cannot stop the stream, otherwise we will have 2 videos, but we want to have one video.
It's really getting cold here in Germany. How's the weather in Canada and Great Britain?
It's cooler in the morning, about 15-14 degrees Celsius. I'm on Lake Ontario, so it's quite pleasant. And during the day, it's probably low to mid-20s. So it's perfect weather.
Here in the UK, it's autumn, definitely. It's not summer anymore. So it's pretty pleasant, but it's no longer the weather you can walk around with only one layer of clothes.
I wasn't even aware you have summer in the UK.
No, we get it sometimes. We get very hot, 100 degrees Fahrenheit from time to time.
I guess that's what climate change would do. Maybe an improvement for the weather in England.
The problem of climate change isn't that you have a different temperature. The problem is the weather is more chaotic, and it's not the increase that's worrying, it's the fact of a continuing increase that destabilizes everything. But I get your point, yes.
I'm just trying to focus on the upside for a moment.
Okay, it's 2:06. We are all back here again. And I would like to hand over the okay, David, you would like to briefly respond on some of the points made in the discussion before. Is that okay for you, Gitta? And afterwards, I will hand over to you.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so David, you're welcome.
It was a really rich discussion, and I want to just pick out a couple of bits where I'd welcome us digging in deeper, bits that I don't know the answers to, and I hope that the collective wisdom will do better. I was really moved by a question Nikola quoted from the conclusion of Yuval Noah Harari's book about if we don't know what we want, we be guilty of terrible damage if we gain more power. Yuval's question, as I remember it, is not what do we want, but what do we want to want? And how do we figure out the answer to that question is very critical. Along the way of the discussion, I had some partial answers to that. I liked very much what I had from David Pearce. He talked about we should not want to slaughter sentient animals on anything like the scale that we're doing now. That's something we should not want. And I was inspired by his suggestion that we could already set a target for legislature, that all slaughterhouses could be shut down by 2030. It will be technology that makes this more feasible. I set in this book, The Raft 2035, 15 goals for what I thought Britain could accomplish by 2035. And one of them was that by 2035, the amount of slaughtered meat we eat in this country will be cut by at least 90% from where we are today. And technology will accelerate that by improvements in cultured meat. And that was a strange idea, but it's becoming more mainstream, and I can see that's happening with the price coming down, the health benefits of cultured meat going up. And that's a good example. But again, we still have to figure out how do we decide that's a good goal. I heard from Yonah, the plea that we should respect neurodiversity, that we should not try and limit our expectation as to what is desirable. And I also think that should be a core part of our vision for what we want in the future. It is not that we are all carbon copies of each other, but that we are indeed appreciative of multiple types of a neural approach. On the other hand, there are some aspects of the diversity of human experience we probably don't want to celebrate, and we want to say, let's have less of it. For example, it used to be that lots of people were afflicted by polio. Now, they were fine people. We wouldn't want to say that they should no longer exist, but we probably would agree that it's better for the world if there are no longer people afflicted by polio. How do we make that decision again? It's worth exploring further. Michael talked about it'd be good if there is more of an abundance of time for creative pursuits, that we wouldn't need to work for a living, anything like as much as we do now. And he envisioned a time in which maybe 4 days a week or even more, we would be free to pursue our creative pursuits, exploring things that would give us great satisfaction and pleasure, but we would no longer need to be paid for them. Is that the kind of thing we would want? I also agree with that as a desirable goal. And in that same book, I have said that by 2035, no one should need to work for a living, and that society should be structured by then so that the automation is producing enough for everybody to have a good quality of life. And by the way, that good quality of life will be much more affordable, cost much less because of the work of abundance. But still, I'm haunted by a question that Nikola raised at the very beginning, which is that in today's world, we have a scarcity of wisdom. We have an abundance of foolishness and irrationality. I mean, 2016 was a bad year for me because of irrationality in politics in several parts of the world. 2020 might be even worse. So what can we do to reassert wisdom? And I want to say finally, before I yield the floor again, I don't think this is a single answer. It's not that we must get wisdom right before we improve technology. I see a more complicated relationship, a systematic thing, that some uses of technology can improve our wisdom to an extent, and that we can bootstrap things if we get it right. You know, it's not going to be easy, but just as we can have technology to help do fact checking in real time, as we can have technology to sort of tap us on the shoulder and give us advice, it's not straightforward, but I see there is a role for technology, as with many other things, including old technologies such as books and meditation is written down to help us. But I'm open to suggestions from the other panelists and indeed from people on YouTube. How would you prioritize gaining an abundance of wisdom more quickly so that we can take full advantage of technology rather than being misled by some of its apparent promise, which would turn out to be a nightmare rather than a dream?
Thank you very much, David. Yes, Nikola, I saw that you want to say something. Let me just bring my point and then I'm silent again. David, you make us jobless here. You know that, yeah? You talk to the people on the YouTube chat and you're moderating the whole thing very, very, very well. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm inspired by your example, Gitta.
Oh, wow. Okay. What I wanted to add here is a more societal perspective. Transhumanism, you brought the concept up more than once, is something many people do not actually know what this is. And it has sometimes a little bit of strange renommee. When people think about transhumanists as people thinking about uploading their brains up to a quantum computer and thinking that their singularity will pop up in the internet and so on. But what we have experienced here is that nobody in this discussion panel has thought about ethics just the last 5 minutes. It is something deeply implemented in the way you approach things. And I thought it might be an interesting idea in the long run to think about how society as a whole takes part in not letting good ideas come to help. As Yonah talked about treatment for mental problems, etc. And I would like to hear a little bit from you, because from my experience with all innovation comes a little bit frustration. Yeah, so, and frustration often leads to being overexcited about the own idea and losing contact to reality. That can happen too. I have listened to transhumanists who actually believe the strangest things. So, but this is not something that is happening here. So my idea is just, if you like, included in this dialogue, so we can listen to your experience with society as people who are deeply, deeply involved into ethical ideas and into a benevolent future for everybody. Thank you. that was it. Nikola, you go next.
Okay, so to address David Wood's question and kind of connect it to some of the points that David Pearce brought, two people that I have learned a lot from and continue to always enjoy learning from and talking to. I want to say that we need to start by, first of all, acknowledging where we are and acknowledging what we lack, acknowledging our current problems and moral dilemmas in order to bring wisdom or lack thereof, as it is right now. And a crucial step in that process, I think, is, I believe, a common mistake that us in the transhumanist community often make, or a common presumption shared among transhumanists. And that's the presumption that more intelligence is better. So I want to question the validity of that claim. And I want to ask David Pearce or David Wood or anyone else to provide us evidence in support of that claim. Because I'm going to give you three different pieces of claims or evidence. One from my personal observation, you can call that anecdotal evidence. One from Einstein's writings, you can call that his personal anecdotal evidence. And one, the third piece would be, I believe, very close to David Pearce's heart. And I think he would agree at least with that one, if not with the other ones. So the first one was this, you know, and the claim here again for clarity is that, in my opinion, there is little to no correlation between intelligence and wisdom, and especially moral behavior, because ethics is a part of wisdom, in my opinion. And so I got to that conclusion observationally, subjectively, anecdotally, when I was 19 years old, and I was conscripted not by choice but by force and by law to go to the Bulgarian army. And there my observation was very simple. You know, before that I was bratty enough and lucky enough to come from the best high school in Bulgaria. And then suddenly, for a number of circumstances, most notably the fact that my wife tends, my mouth tends to speak way too often when it should be closed, I ended up in a punishment unit in the mountains. And when you're in the military, when you do something bad, you're not being prosecuted under civic law or civilian law. You're being prosecuted by a military court or court-martialed. And there's a unit which holds people who are being investigated for, let's say, stabbings, murders, rapes, or any kind of crimes. And so I was actually sent to that unit because I spoke in front of the whole unit against my commanding officer. So that was my crime, personally. And there I observed the following situation. There are people, and by the way, the highest rate of education in that unit was 3rd grade. So here's me coming from the best high school in the country, and then the next most educated person is 3rd grade. And there I observed people who are not very educated and by all artworthy signs are not very bright, not very smart in any way that you would qualify that as standard test or culturally accepted for. And yet, when push came to shove, they were able and willing to do the right thing. They were willing to do the right thing, even if it came at a high personal cost with dangers to their own life. And then in other units where I was sent much later, elite units, and eventually I got promoted. The funny thing was that I got promoted to be a sergeant in that place. Anyway, then I observed the opposite behavior by people who are considered to be elite, coming from the best schools, the best educational institutions, some of them already with university degrees, who exhibited quite the opposite behavior and who used their intelligence to kind of avoid getting themselves into dangerous situation at the expense of the whole team and everyone else around them. And to even undermine thereby the safety of everyone around them just so that they don't have to do extra work or take their share of the risk. And so I observed there where you know, there's not much of a correlation between intelligence and ethics or moral behavior or wisdom. Now, Albert Einstein spoke about that experience of his when he was in Berlin, in Germany, because Berlin, between the two wars, was the center of the scientific world. And some of the smartest scientists were Albert Einstein's colleagues. And he was shocked to discover that basically overnight, his colleagues became from, you know, very good scientists interested in their own particular kind of science to German nationalists, and switched their scientific endeavor to producing weapons of mass destruction, such as mustard gas, you know, missiles, rockets, you name it. Basically tools that allowed Germany to kill tens of thousands of people, and the scientists had absolutely no problem with it whatsoever, but considered that to be their patriotic duty and were proud of it. Albert Einstein, needless to say, was shocked and disgusted. So here's the smartest people in the world supposedly doing terrible things, things which after the war were often considered crimes against humanity, right? And then finally, to David Pearce's point about the hedonistic imperative. As David knows, I am a fellow vegan, and not to a little part influenced by him. I remember the first interview I did with David Pearce many, many years ago, where I was non-vegan and I was kind of arguing against it. And then now it's been almost 5 years that I've been vegan. And so thank you for that sort of enlightening education, David. But I think you would agree with me that unfortunately the way society treats all other species today, by the fact that we kill somewhere between 70 and 75 billion animals on our planet every year, and something like 1.2 trillion aquatic organisms of all kinds of types, fish, shrimp, you know, you name it, over 1.2 trillion of those every year, right? So I think you would agree that our intelligence so far has not been able to be translated to empathy or compassion towards the animal and aquatic worlds. So it doesn't seem to be translating. And so my question to you then is, why is there that presumption in our transhumanist community that more intelligence, super intelligence, will be better? Because to me, it seems that what you're doing with more intelligence is, it's like a volume knob. All you're doing is you're turning on the volume of what you already have as the input signal. And my concern is that right now the input signal is not very good. And if that's true, if that claim is true, then all you're going to do is you're going to crank up the damage. You're going to take the damage we're doing right now exponential, because you're going to have more powerful tools, but equal or less wisdom and equal or less ethics and morality, and therefore you would only end up doing more damage. So please tell me, alleviate my concerns. Why am I wrong here, logically or otherwise?
I would say you're right. I don't have any dispute with your thesis that intelligence is orthogonal to moral status. I mean, this thesis that's in the transhumanist literature of orthogonality, you can marry any goal with any kind of intelligence, and you must therefore focus on the morality or the wisdom as well as the intelligence. And the Transhumanist Declaration, which David Pearce was helped to draft back in 1998, is quite clear that there are many bad consequences that could come from using technology in an ill-considered way. So transhumanism is not praising intelligence in its own right. It calls in that 1998 declaration for communities of discussion. The question is why these haven't always come to the fore in public analysis of transhumanism, why transhumanists often have a kind of a crazy public perception instead of this other strand. I call it the inner transhumanism. I wrote about it in a blog post in 2011, shockingly. I've put a link in the YouTube channel now, when I said absolutely alongside goals for greater strength, we need goals for greater kindness. Alongside goals for greater intelligence, we need goals for greater wisdom, and so on. But I do think we do need more intelligence as well to get good cures for COVID. We're going to need a lot of intelligence to find other kinds of treatments. So I'm not going to slow down getting intelligence, but absolutely we need to talk more and more about the inner aspects of the transhumanist vision, as well as these outer ones. David Pearce, you're on mute.
Unmute. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you're back. Thank you.
I'm back. Sorry about that. Yes, I mean, the Transhumanist Declaration of 1998, reaffirmed 2009, expresses a commitment to the well-being of all sentients, and rather than just being boilerplate, this is actually technically feasible. But following on this very interesting discussion we're just having, I want to argue against the orthogonality thesis in that I think it's possible that full spectrum superintelligence will lead to a convergence of values. And by way of an example, if you know the phenomenon of mirror touch synesthesia, whereas if you have mirror touch synesthesia, you feel another person's pain as though it were your own. I mean, which is, you know, two mirror touch synesthetes couldn't have a fist fight. It would be like harming oneself. Or to give another example, something like the conjoined Hogan sisters, who share a thalamic bridge and can some extent actually experience each other's differing perspectives. And I think if one has a notion of full spectrum superintelligence, it's not just a case of having an off the scale IQ. IQ tests measure what may very, very crudely be called the autistic dimension of intelligence. Full spectrum superintelligence will have a superhuman capacity for empathetic understanding, social cognition. And what seems to have driven the evolution of distinctively human intelligence has been our capacity for cooperative problem solving, social cognition, higher order intentionality, by which I mean that I may think, that you want, that she believes, that I hope, very, very cognitively demanding. And if we do have this conception of full spectrum superintelligence, then I would envisage us expanding our circle of compassion, enriching our capacity for perspective taking in conjunction with radically enhanced autistic intelligence, the kind of intelligence measured by IQ tests. And I think both are absolutely vital, because if one doesn't have, again, crudely, autistic intelligence, one won't have the hyper systematizing impulse that leads transhumanists to be able to envisage such things as systematically reprogramming the biosphere, adjusting the level of suffering throughout the living world, the kind of hyper systematizing impulse. But if one doesn't have this ability to take other perspectives, then yes, one is, in a fundamental sense, one is ignorant. I would say that someone who cannot imagine what it is like to have a diversity of other perspectives, it's a bit like not knowing the second law of thermodynamics. It's a form of ignorance. One more point that I'll cede the floor, whatever the expression is. Are we ever really going to agree on ethics? This might seem to many people extremely implausible, because obviously millions, billions of people with apparently conflicting values and preferences. And one of the reasons I personally focus so much on the question of hedonic uplift and gradients of intelligent well-being is that it circumvents this problem of irreconcilable preferences. That, you know, to give an example, if there are 100 people, 100 different, supporting 100 different football teams, there is simply no way you can reconcile conflicting preferences. But what you can do is give everyone an extremely high quality of life. And if we are prepared to apply systematic hedonic uplift to recalibrate our reward circuitry, the hedonic treadmill, it's possible to lift everyone up without taking a particular stance on all kinds of thorny political issues.
I'm happy to take on that point here, and even the previous one. So, first of all, can we ever agree on ethics? Absolutely, yes. That's what we do. That's why we have a civilization. For example, if I heard you correctly, you gave the example of 100 soccer teams or football teams. Sure, they all come from all over the world, and they all have already agreed on the rules of playing soccer. They already agreed on what is and what is not allowed in a game of soccer. They already agreed that there will be a referee. They already agreed on the duration of each game. They already agreed on the like how we count the score, how we settle disputes when there's like you know, a dispute situation. That is all an ethical framework that people from all over the world have already embraced. And that's, of course, the presumption of any legal framework that creates either national or international framework. So we have, for example, things like the sanctity of law, I mean, the sanctity of safety, right? So your ethical system may say, oh, I'm allowed to go and kill anybody I want, anytime I want, because the kind of authority in my tribe, as there are tribes in the world, is based on how many people I have killed in my life. And the more people I kill, the more respect I get among the members of my tribe, and the more popular and powerful I become. Well, we have concluded that, you know, in most places in the world, and we have embraced that ethics to the point where it's now law, that you cannot simply do that. And so there's certain kinds of ethics which we share amongst each other. And there's even more so, as I mentioned, frameworks which allow us to dispute resolve. And then what was the previous point? The previous point that you mentioned, you know, I forget it. So let's yield the floor here. That was the more important point anyway. Yes, there is such thing as ethics, and yes, we can agree on it, and we have already done so, and all of civilization is based on that. That's my claim.
Okay, thank you, Nikola.
United Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1946-47. It's a pretty good document still. It was done by a collaborative process. I think Eleanor Roosevelt had a key role there, but it took input from people from Indian traditions, European traditions, Latin American traditions as well. It's a good example of how there's some agreement could be made. I do think we need to revise that document urgently now and bring it up to date. It will help to give the United Nations and other bodies a new lease of life. But I agree, there can be some framework within which our diversity happily exists.
Thank you. I would like to have a view on the chat in the YouTube stream, which is there's lots of traffic and many people discussing there heavily on what you are mentioning and discussing. And I would like to hand over to Yonah again about the question of the prioritization of human interest, especially when it comes to care or suffering from diseases. Then that does not necessarily have to do anything with hedonic treadmill, but it's maybe sometimes it's even urgent to solve problems here. What do you think about this, Yonah?
First of all, I would love to make some comment about intelligence, empathy, abundance, technology abundance, and after that, continue ideas on health conditions. First of all, a part of my work is to find very talented young people. One of the best people in the world is a kind of part of my work. So I screen talent from MIT, Harvard, in Singapore, in South Africa, in Nigeria, picking people from 11, 12 to up to 20 years old to understand who are actually kind of a problem solvers. It's for sure, it's an abstract idea. We need something specific. So all of the time, I try to understand what exactly intelligence is, what exactly problem solvers are about. In my experience, and I can't agree with empathy and intelligence and antagonistic. In my experience, based on the hundreds of the most talented people I faced, the more intelligence they have, the more social intelligence, empathy they have. For instance, one of the best interviews I had was with the 11 years old Samira Mehta. She's the youngest AI inventor in the world. And one of the best things I learned from her, she's extremely, has a comprehensive view of things. She doesn't divide technology in philanthropy. She believes there is no entrepreneurship without impact. For instance, in today's world, we think about entrepreneurship in some kind of ESG, social responsibility is a kind of additional function. At the same time, the best minds I face, we don't see any distinction. They see it as a one core thing in the same place. And basically, the best people I faced in universities or a bit older than 18 years old, they were extremely sensitive to the world. It helped them to reflect problems, to define them, and build very accurate solutions, starting from prototype. In startup world, we use the term MVP, and after that, deliver results. It's really hard to build stuff using just the data and research. It's really about what we call intuition, but in reality, it's more about empathy. Another things I would love to mention, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I had opportunity to talk with the very smart people who work in this field. And based on my data, lack of empathy is very often, it's actually kind of a personality disorder. If we're talking about psychopathy, 10% of people have a psychopath trait, and I mentioned it, and there's a disorder located in frontal lobes. So it's just a brain difference, the type of neurodiversity. And Nikola mentioned why we have so knowledge in our economy, but this economy still doesn't care about climate change, why our decisions are not so efficient. Because we have some type of neurodiverse individuals who make these decisions. We have a knowledge, we have a information, they are very informed agents of economy, but they still make a decision we're not productive for our people. Why? Because driven by their neurodiversity, they have no empathy. But it's not about people in general. In most cases, smart, typically not neurodiverse person have a tendency make a decision that's driven by empathy. And I've never seen actual something different for that. Another thing I would love to talk about is the technology abundance, how to actually connect what we have today with the technology. Actually, it's a huge journey for me because I've started working in tech and startups in 2005, and over the years, everything changed. We've done so many things in order to democratize tech. We have so many startups. Do you know we have 700 startups accelerators, but problems still exist. Why? With what I've mentioned before, we have on one hand, some kind of what I call Hollywood of startups is what we see in Y Combinator. Sometimes, unfortunately, in my lovely ones, 500 startups is just kind of industry. And we have a guys and we have a kind of funnel and vertical working in order to solve actual problems. So what I try to make, what our colleagues try to make, and what I see is a way to provide technology abundance. First, and what Nikola mentioned, is define where we are and how we see ecosystems. For instance, before we have some kind of idea what is education is a kind of the whole institution. But just imagine what we don't care about Harvard and we don't care about Stanford. But for instance, I'm a person who sitting in my room and I would love to pick one professor from Harvard, one professor from Stanford, one professor from NUS in Singapore and build my class. I don't care about Harvard. I care about experiences. I care about empathy of particular person, and I would love to build my own class. So it's a different vision of education. Second, how we see professionals. I had a great talk with a person who led Nursing Association of United States. She's one of the experts of artificial intelligence and robotics. And one of the topic we discuss, how we see nurses today, is a person who help and treat people, or it's an engineer. Because nowadays we have so many automation like facial recognition in medical rooms. We have a rehabilitation exoskeletons for people. And now nurses is a 50% human being who try to use empathy in order to help people recover. At the same time, it's an engineer who use different kind of technology to automate or make this process more powerful. Another thing, how we use solutions. I've already mentioned it before that before, both from a traditional perspective and technology perspective, tech companies try to tap bigger markets. Like I built one thing for everyone, and the type of design thinking just going away. And starting from Microsoft, who started to use the vision, one design for one people. And that's why we see neurodiverse platforms and education, a different kind of a special type of personality based workflow startups and platforms. Another thing, how we see tech ecosystems. Because do you know that even Harvard or MIT-based startups often die because we're not able to get funding? Why? Because what type of technology they build just not relevant to metrics and vision of venture investors. And that's why you can imagine how many great researchers we have, but we're not able to deliver it to the market as actual products for people because we're not able to make sufficient amount of money for investors in the particular period of time. And that's why, for instance, just a few months ago, my colleague demonstrated how it could work. She launched, for instance, a platform that connect investors and angel investors that specifically invest in autism spectrum startups. So it connect very niche investors and very niche problem, because many of these investors are parents of kids with autism or mental health issues, and they care. And when we don't need special education for them to demonstrate that this problem matters, because they know stats, they know that their kids have no perspective in life without particular type of education. And finally, is it how we see ethics and policies? You mentioned that some people believe that, like Nikola, that ethics is a kind of a pretty confirmed. I think there's no any discussion. I believe that we have some kind of compromise. Yes, we can pick like a Declaration of Human Rights as a kind of a compromise of ethics, but I would say it's a pretty difficult thing. And I work around the world. I work in Middle East. I work in program between Palestine and Israel. And we build a program that had a mission to connect people who are in war many, many, many years. And there are so many diplomatic things we needed to take into account, be so flexible. And I would say then we state like ethics is just a 0 or 1. It doesn't work in this way in real life, or it's pretty dangerous. And we should be very diplomatic, depending on the niche, type of technology we discuss, type of a country, culture, and so on. So it's a kind of my input.
As to whether there is this orthogonality or not between greater intelligence and greater ethical ability, first of all, the next session, which Nikola is going to be spearheading after a break, looks, I think, at quite a lot of these angles on AI and ethics. So I'm looking forward to hearing that. Secondly, there is the question of empirical studies of this. I put a link into the YouTube chat of a whole bunch of answers, in which the general answer from empirical observation is that there are lots of really intelligent people who do really nasty things, as Nikola said earlier. And from my own experience in managing large software teams, I do have to say, occasionally you get a very bright software engineer who is not at all good to work with and is actually poisonous to work with occasionally. But finally, there is a field that actually does look at this very seriously. It's the field of artificial general intelligence alignment, which is to try and figure out, is there potentially a problem that as artificial intelligence becomes more generally intelligent, that it might run off in a direction not perfectly aligned with humans? And most of the people who look at this have the view, oh, there's a real problem there. We might be lucky. There might be factors such as David Pearce has mentioned that might cause an alignment, but most people think it's not going to happen unless we manage it very carefully indeed. So for all these reasons, I am cautious about thinking that all we need to do is crank out more intelligence and we'll get to a better world. I am here sharing it with Nikola, and I've given my reasons for doing so.
And just to pick up on the point of David just made about some very bright software engineers, and Yonah about sort of sociopathy. You know, there are some very, very smart software engineers right now in Silicon Valley, and thanks to a great degree, thanks to them, we have a sociopath as one of the most powerful people in the world. So that's kind of in support of both of our previous claims. And just to be clear, I never said or believed for 1 second that ethics is a 0 and 1 binary field. That's typical of software engineers, which I'm not. So to be clear, ethics is very much more complicated. It's a lot more subtle. And we have a framework, as I said, which is a good foundation to build upon. Things such as, you know, guaranteed mutual safety and physical respect, non-violence, and therefore a dispute resolution. But that doesn't mean there will be no disputes. It means that we would always have things to discuss, and ethics is always in the process of development and is never finished and done, because to a great degree, what is considered ethical is a child of the time or the epoch that we live in. And for example, me and David Pearce share this belief that in the future, the way we treat now all of our sentient and sapient beings other than the human species would be considered utterly barbaric from the point of view of our future generations looking back at us. And from their ethical point of view, they may be even ashamed of us, or you know, we should be perhaps ashamed of ourselves, as I think me and David would argue. But this is not the prevalent ethical framework right now, even though this is also seems to be shifting. And there's a lot more momentum behind this whole idea. And this is only one example. The same is true of women voting, of, you know, against slavery, you know, capitalism, the importance of education, or any of those things. They change in time, so ethics change, and so people change, and so hopefully we actually make progress, and we become better individuals, better people, better entrepreneurs, and hopefully better civilization. Even though unfortunately it's not a straight line and it's very jagged up and down, and sometimes the downs can really be very badly down to the point that it threatens the viability of our whole civilization.
Okay, but
I would like to make a quick remark.
Yes, sure.
For David. While maybe I'm not able to go very deep in neuroscience, but definitely I would say the whole question of intelligence is still very open. First of all, that you mentioned, it's not high intelligence, it's called high functionality. For instance, in schizoid personality disorder, you have a highly functional schizoid. Is a person who are not able to feel empathy and emotions, but able to demonstrate social mask. For instance, for you, is an employer, and you will never know about things they have on mind. Actually, you're not able to judge and state any kind of a level of intelligence without very deep level of trials, psychiatric test, and so on. Nikola mentioned that there is a high percent of a sociopath in Silicon Valley. Yes, it's called highly functional sociopath. There is a particular percent not highly functional sociopath, is that people who make crimes and go to the prison. For instance, Ferranis, typical sociopathic behavior. She broke the rule, but at the same time, she was so aggressive, not really detailed in some particular actions, so she failed. Some people more efficient, but it's not about intelligence, because do you know why? They're not able to make change. They make money for themselves. It's just a question of motivation. Any sociopath or psychopath, they never driven by actual change. So just check these companies, what they create. For instance, if you go to Y Combinator, do you know what percent of startup, the very deep technology in healthcare, they go to a Y Combinator and they say them, okay, we go to the digital health app. We don't care about this tech. We just need to make money. So you see another unicorns with $1 billion valuation, and you say they're smart. They're not smart. They're efficient. They're highly functional. It's not about intelligence. So there is no dispute. I agree at some point this, David. I just would love to say that it's a very complicated question, how we define intelligence, how we define motivation, and how we actually evaluate people in different situations. Very complicated question. And I would love to have maybe some kind of a neuroscientist or people related to mental health to drive more conversation in answers to this discussion. Thank you.
To me, very interesting, the point you made about efficiency. As much as I see it, when it comes to efficiency, and let's have a look at business, at producing industries or trading industries, then there's no question of ethics or wisdom. Then new technologies are implemented to augment whatever helps the company to grow and to prosper. But as I learned from you, Yonah, this does not take place when it comes to any kind of medical or care industry. So what about this process of wisdom when it comes to new technologies and to augmenting technologies? Whoever wants.
I think we must be careful not to be misled by our intuitions. Sometimes wisdom is thought to be something we can access by digging deep into the realms of our minds and looking at ancient cultures. Some of our ancient intuitions are very much opposed to some of the enhancements that can be made. There was a hostility towards the idea of test tube babies, for example. Many people said this is an abomination. These children who were created in such a way would not be true humans. Some theologians said they wouldn't have a soul. Lots of humanistic philosophers said these children are going to wake up and realize their mom and dad made them in a test tube, and how terrible that would be. And so there was this hostility towards it for a while. And then people looked at these children who were born, and they seemed to have as much of a soul as anybody else, and the family seemed to be really happy. So that was one case when the yuck reaction proved to be misleading. We also said yuck when we first heard about heart transplants. When heart transplants isn't an ideal solution by any means, there are better solutions we could get with bioengineered 3D printed organs grown from stem cells. But for the time being, we sort of now say, let's say, move beyond that initial future shock. So intuition has a part to play. If we hear our intuition speaking to us powerfully, we should listen to it and try to understand it. But sometimes we need to set it aside, which is why we need, as I said in my opening remarks, we need imagination, but then we need to apply a wisdom to see that. I'd love to bring David Pearce into the conversation here, because I'm sure he's got views as to, how do we respond? How do we find the true wisdom to make the right decisions? Because many people say to his ideas, oh, that's too weird. You can't get lions lying down with antelopes. That's bonkers.
Well, this is one reason if it's a traditional audience, one will generally start from Isaiah and the peaceable kingdom, and it's all set out in the Bible, or what the Bible does. The wolf lying down the lamb. It omits some of the technical details, and this is what, as transhumanists, we offer. I mean, the vision of a world without suffering and a peaceable kingdom is aimed to the Bible or the religions of the Indian subcontinent. What I would perhaps, this is a rather controversial view. I mean, a lot of people will, particularly scientifically oriented people, will say that all values are subjective, take an anti-realist position. But one can argue that the pain-pleasure axis discloses the world's inbuilt metric of value and disvalue. And that if we were to encounter hypothetically an alien civilization, they might have, if they experience phenomenal color, an inverted spectrum for color, but one wouldn't find that they valued states of agony and despair, for example. Now, there might seem various obvious counter-arguments to this. What about masochists? But in fact, something like masochism actually confirms the conjecture, because if you're a masochist, certain otherwise humiliating or painful activities trigger the release of endogenous opioids that are intensely rewarding. The claim that the pleasure-pain axis discloses the world's inbuilt metric of disvalue doesn't mean that we're all closet utilitarians, but that's because evolution has engineered us to have this incredibly egotistical perspective, in that, naively, I am the center of the universe, the hub of reality that follows me around. Now, though I know, I've in part internalized the scientific world picture, and in theory, I know I'm not special. But if I take things at face value, I'm extremely special, the center of reality. So rather, if one looks at people, sometimes what seems to be monstrous, narcissistic, even psychopathic behavior, it's simply, in a sense, taking at face value what seems to be the case, that they are the most important entity in the world. And one of the reasons I think, yes, we should be so keen on developing full spectrum superintelligence is that in conjunction with this primacy of the pleasure-pain axis, I think, yes, we can imagine ratcheting up all life to a state of extreme well-being, or as I like to say, information-sensitive gradients of well-being, so we can all retain critical insight, social responsibility.
Well, let me push you a little bit here, David, back, and I remembered my second point that I forgot to address or failed to address beforehand. And first of all, let me take the example of the lion lying with the lamb. And I think that can be very easily and empirically proved that it's possible. All you need to do is go on YouTube and just Google strange animal relationships or friendships. You would be amazed by hundreds upon hundreds of videos where you have all kinds of peaceful relationships between lions and lambs, and all kinds of other strange, friendship animal relationship. Just go to YouTube and watch, for weeks if you want to. And that shows you that empirically there's many examples when this is not only possible, but it actually happens, and it's been well documented. And we don't even know how it works. We don't even know why it worked in this particular case. And sometimes the examples are kind of shocking by their apparent incompatibility, and yet they're evident. Now, the point that I was trying to make earlier, and I forgot, is about this kind of techno-solutionism. About so you were giving the example of how presumably by genetic manipulation we can have a mirror empathy tool, which would mean that two people with such a kind of genetic manipulation would not get into a fist fight, for example, or not be violent against each other. And I would say yes, that could possibly work. But the question is, do we actually need a genetic solution for something that, you know, under all reasonable expectation, we should resolve by proper education and socialization? So I believe you can accomplish the same result with other tools other than technology. Now, obviously, there would be border cases, so let's not go immediately to them, because extreme cases make for poor law. But at least by far the default option should not be immediately let's go to a genetic solution or to a techno solution. And that's one of my concerns, is that us in the transhumanist community often see technology as the silver bullet for everything. Oh, you lack empathy? Great, I'm gonna give you some CRISPR genetic manipulation. Tomorrow you'll be more empathetic. Wait a second, you know, most people can do with some better education, some socialization, some love, for God's sake, some poetry, some music, you know, maybe some psilocybin in some cases, or something else, maybe some drink, as David Wood said, you know, in the army, supposedly that helps a lot with the bonding experience. I never got that myself, which is, of course, why I was always a lone wolf. But, you know, there's many other ways that you can accomplish that, both in the short and in the long term, that do not require techno-solutionism. And that's my concern, is that we always, our default mode in the transhumanist community is, let's take the technology and make it happen like this.
Yes, Gitta, please.
A question to all of you. David, you in the beginning talked about the loss of consciousness while uploading human intelligence to whatever computer. And you, Nikola, made an important point right there, as you did, David and Yonah. There might be limits to what technological augmentation can do. From a more philosophical perspective, or from a constructivist perspective, we have to consider the human psyche as an emergent phenomenon to biology. So the idea of hacking, for example, people's minds and uploading them completely might be something that never will work, because consciousness works emergently. That is something I want to throw in and hear what you are thinking about. So please.
So in my own discussion of transhumanism, I rarely lead with the idea of uploading the mind from the brain into computers or into the cloud.
Or hacking, like a lack of empathy, and then we hack it, and then a person has empathy. There might be limits to this. That is why I was motivated to talk about this.
So that's why we have to find out. We have to do some scientific experiments. We have to figure out what the best science has to tell us, and that may change, about what causes empathy and so forth. And then we have to figure out what's the most practical and ethical. What's the best way to bring that about? And it might involve some technology, might involve some pills, might involve some drinking, might involve some exercises, might involve some music. Mm-hmm. We should not be doctrinaire in advance to rule some things in or rule some things out.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
There are.
Yeah, thank you, David, because that leads to a more broader concept of technology, as you initiated it with meditation and dance and music, etc., etc. Of course, there are technological approaches to this, as we do with FORMWELT research, where we can translate language into sound, light, etc., and helping people to get another access to their conditioning, and thus we can learn to reprogram themselves. That all comes together. I really want to bring the initiate point yeah, here once again on the tablet, so we do not get lost in a concept of technology that is alienating people. That is my idea here.
There's lots of things we take for granted, which previous generations would have called strange technology. I think Douglas Adams, the author of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, said something like, you know, if a technology is invented before you were born, it's part of the natural order of things. If a technology is invented whilst you're less than 30, it's cool and interesting. And if a technology is invented after you're 50, it's bizarre and horrible, and who would ever want it, you know? So our understanding of technology changes. There are many things I'd call technologies, such as cryptocurrencies or even money. There's the banking system. There are things which we have invented, which are able to deliver some goods, and they are tools of one sort or another. We humans have been using tools right from the very beginning. Fire transformed the body because fire allowed us to cook vegetables as well as cook meat. It allowed our digestive system over hundreds of thousands of years to shrink. It allowed more of the body's energy to go to the brain. It allowed the brain to get bigger because we had tamed fire. Another very early technology was the sling, which was you could create a sling around the woman's body or the man's body to carry the baby, allowing them to have two free hands. So effectively, we became an artificial kangaroo. So now we just take clothing for granted, but in a sense, it was a technological invention as well. So technology, we need to have a broad view at it, but certainly we should not regard it as a god, and it's not the only solution, and we shouldn't be pro-technology fundamentalists or anti-technology fundamentalists. Instead, we must get the human element first. We need to figure out what we want, and then figure out which kind of technologies are the best to get us there. And then we still need to monitor in case we were wrong and figure out, oh, we were misled. It's actually more complicated. Like when we sprayed DDT, we thought DDT would be great. And then it turned out, as an insecticide, it turned out to have lots of other adverse impacts on the environment. So we need to keep watching wisely as well. And if we get it right, we can reach the kind of a state of superabundance, which various people on this call have talked about.
So let's talk about technology, but let's be careful not to overextend it here, okay? Because it's very important, and I think part of the problem we have today with technology is that the meaning of technology has become vague to the point of, and broad to the point of vagueness and dangerously so. So, and I'm kind of skipping forward here because I'll be talking a lot more about this in the next section, but technology has a very simple, specific, and limited meaning, and unfortunately that meaning has been lost throughout the millennia and throughout the ages, and now it's referred to as pretty much anything. Technology comes from two words in ancient Greek, techne and logos. Techne means art, craft, skill, etc. Logos means an outward expression of an inner thought, an utterance, or a word. And so technology literally means a discourse about how things are gained. It's literally a means to an end. It is not, and it was never, anything more than a means to an end. And it's a discourse about how things are gained. That's at least the original Greek meaning. And again, I think many of the problems we're having today are because that society, unfortunately, has become so obsessed with technology to the point that it's no longer merely a means to an end, but now it's become an end to itself. And we have become, unfortunately, the means to that end. So that's like literally putting the technology of a cart in front of the horse, which we are supposed to be pulling or directing and determining which way it should go. And unless and until we kind of put things in the right priority order, we're not going to be able to direct technology to a more productive direction. And speaking more about the value of things that are not means to an end, but are merely ends in themselves, that's again where things such as dance comes to be so important, that was mentioned before that. And also meditation, by the way, and many other experiential things, music, and so on. You see, the point of dancing is not to get from this particular point on the floor to that particular point of the floor. The point of music is not to get to the end of the musical piece. The very point of those two activities are the activities themselves, is the doing it that matters, not getting somewhere to it. Just like, you know, it's not the people who play music in the fastest way possible, which are the best people, and it's not the point to let's go to the end. So really, it's not about the destination. Those are activities where the journey is what matters. And the same with meditation. It's not like, oh, I need to meditate to get to something. You meditate for meditation itself, for being in that kind of space, which allows you to have an experiential experience. That's kind of tautology, but I don't know how better to awareness, maybe an experiential awareness of a realm beyond you, if you will, which is kind of very woohoo sounding, but we have a ton of empirical evidence that this does miracles to our brains and has a tremendously positive impact on so many conditions, right? And so those are examples of activities which are non-technologically based, well, or not so much anyway. Meditation is entirely divorced from technology, but you know, music apparently, obviously, and other art requires some kind of technology, but they can enrich our experience to an enormous degree and to an enormous level.
Nikola, I think you would love to have a look at the artificial emulations of the self-referential and autopoietic systems we are doing here, based on our logic of cognition. There you can see actually, and now you mentioned dancing again and meditation, etc. That it is all about self-rhythmization. Yeah, that's a very, very important point, and that is what all autopoietic systems do. Yeah, I just want to mention that.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic to me. And I interviewed some time ago Darko Nikolic from the Bismarck Institute, and he's the creator of something called Practopoiesis, which talks about how we can build a smarter AI, which is basically, and he argues that the current machine learning and deep neural networks are grossly insufficient. You know, a criticism that has been leveled by many people, such as Gary Marcus, for example, and many others. And his proposed solution is Practopoiesis, which is kind of a learning about learning about learning. It's kind of a very complicated concept, but it's like a neighbor of autopoiesis. Or Practopoiesis is derived out of autopoiesis.
Yes.
So yes.
Yes, I understand. We are we coming from a semantical approach, and I have a concept. I will talk about this in the next conference where you hold the keynote, where we are about to create an artificial intelligence that learns to create meaning. Yeah, with the help of FORMWELT. So yes, I totally agree. There are many more ways that have to be explored. For example, from semantic perspectives, where many people say that will not work. Well, Ralf and I did not know that, so we did it.
I just finished an interview a couple of days ago, and unfortunately, I was preparing for this event, so I didn't have the chance to publish it. So I'm hoping to publish it within the next week or two if it's really bad. But with a professor called Melanie Mitchell, and she's the graduate student of Douglas Hofstadter, who is like a very famous AI researcher, wrote a seminal book in the late 70s called GEB as an abbreviation. And I'm sure David Wood can help me remember the full name.
Gödel Escher-Bach.
Gödel Escher-Bach on Insight into I or Me. I don't know the English title. And there
The Mind's Eye.
Yes.
Yeah, and she argues, unsurprisingly perhaps, about the importance of Hofstadter's idea about metaphors and concepts.
Yeah.
And their claim is the fact that if you don't have some way for AI to get metaphors and to get concepts, you're never going to have an AGI.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was our approach. Hofstadter and Marvin Minsky inspired us deeply. as did Niklas Luhmann from a systemic perspective, and some constructivists who are also delivering very important concepts when it comes to reconstructing or remodeling human cognition. Yes.
And if you look at the current so-called best examples of AI, which is one shape or another of basically reinforced learning, neural networks and stuff like that, they lack complete awareness of concepts and of analogies. They lack complete awareness.
I could hug you right now. Thank you. Okay, I'm going audio off now.
Yeah, we should try it in this virtual room. Maybe it's somehow manageable. Yeah.
You see, but you see, that's an important point though, because you see, hugging is an essential part of humanity, or has been for thousands of years, and it communicates at a number of levels, many of which are non-rational, but it's tremendously powerful and tremendously meaningful, and it has lasting effects. You know, we can talk about, you know, how good friends we are and all of this, and then if you give me like this kind of a hug, ooh, or you do something physical, you know, and you can tell me that we're the best of friends and you love me, but if your hug is like, yeah, you know, I would immediately discount and that's not true of me only, but people would tend to discount your words, because the physical hug communicates so much information at such a short time at so many levels. And you see, we're not even close to getting to be able to replicate this. And that's why I'm struggling in many ways right now, because, you know, I make my living with keynote speaking. And one of the things about my keynotes is that I never use any tech. I always talk about the highest of tech that we can think of, but I never use even slides. Basically, I go up on stage and I speak. And the positive side of that is twofold, at least. One was, first, that makes me uniquely different. So from branding purposes, it works very well because people remember that. Secondly, from practical purposes, I had an experience where, for whatever reason, the convention where I was speaking together with a bunch of other people lost power. And, you know, I was supposed to speak around lunchtime, and we lost power at 8:30 in the morning, which was about 25-30 minutes before the first speaker was due to come out speaking at 9 o'clock. And it turns out that the two speakers before me, 2 or 3 speakers, were unable to deliver their keynotes because they couldn't use their slides, they couldn't do their computer thing, etc., etc. And to me, that's a perfect example of where technology, instead of developing your skills and enhancing your skills, has basically handicapped you. You have allowed that point that your abilities, instead of growing, have shrunk. And then what happened was, I put a table, we put a chair. I had to go speak first because nobody else was able to. I put a chair and people kind of huddled around me. It was like a tight group of entrepreneurs, maybe about 40 to 50 people. And, you know, I did my thing without any PA or a speaker or microphone, just projecting my voice. And everyone remembered that thing months and months later and was ranting about it, because it was a totally, entirely different experience. It made it a lot more intimate. It made it a lot more authentic. And there was all kinds of communication happening at all kinds of level that generally, if I'm on a stage far away from people with a big screen behind me with slides, it's very hard to communicate. And now, when we are in this situation with COVID, you know, I don't want to be just some guy who does slides on Zoom for people. I can do that. I don't have problem or fear with the tech, but I just don't want to be that. And so I'm refusing to do it right now out of pure stubbornness. And that's creating, of course, that comes at a price, of course. But to me, it's this kind of the human touch and relationship, which is like right now, at least so far, irreproducible by technology.
Human evolution is evolution of sign processing in complex re-entry forms, with starts with signs that are non-verbal. Yes, thank you. So, final round.
So I will offer a pro-technology conclusion to complement what Nikola said. I will talk about the way in which technology can enhance meditation and can also deliver something akin to hugs. I speak to many people who meditate. I don't meditate myself, but I do speak to many who do, and they say it's a struggle to meditate. It's a struggle to quieten themselves down. And sometimes they value that struggle, but there is a technology, I'll just put it into the chat window. It's called Sensate. It's a bit here, it comes as it looks like a pebble, and it vibrates. It vibrates and sends infrasound sound, not ultrasound, infrasound to the vagus nerve, which is the big nerve that wanders around between the brain and the heart and the lungs. And it's been described as a bit like a cat purring on your lap. You know, humans have got very good experiences sometimes with cat purring. And people who put this on and hear it vibrating in such a way, not hearing it, although it is complemented with a sound, a carefully chosen sound through the headset, it can bring them into a state much more quickly when they're then able to deeply meditate. So the technology helps them reach more reliably these states of higher consciousness rather than having an awkward and difficult meditative experience. So we need to survive without technology, absolutely. We need to be able to give presentations when PowerPoint isn't working. We need to be able to succeed when our infrastructure fails, but at the same time, this technology can help us. And I believe in the future, people will have things they eat or drink that puts their brain into a different mode, as well as the vibrations of the like the sensate, and more of us will be reaching these enchanted states of bliss, of consciousness, which just very occasionally mystics of old used to glimpse. We will be there much more often, and that will be truly wonderful experiences, helping us be truly human, but with technology helping us there.
Thank you. That was a nice final statement. Maybe I could invite the others to give a final statement as well, because time is running. As always, when I'm in the room with Gitta, I don't know how this can happen. So please feel free to start, whoever wants to.
I would love to make a comment. First of all, I'm really happy about Nikola remark. If I will face him, I will hug and kiss him. And we will be the best friends. Okay. First of all, I completely agree that technology can be used not something when in conflict with the other approaches like meditation, sport activity, music. For instance, I'm an artist and I create music all of my life. It's kind of my second life. I create technology, but I create music. And I would say there were different periods when I mostly create everything almost using some acoustic stuff. At the same time, there was a period when I used computer and technology. So both approaches worked, but the way how my brains work is different. It's not kind of a competition. It's just a different experiences. So I believe we should not choose something like one thing. There's a different approaches to your life. At the same time, I would love to pick some cases from my work. For instance, there are startups that are working on VR headsets for mental health disorders like depression. In most cases, they don't say that it's able to treat your depression. It's just one tool. You still need to go to psychiatrists. You still not need counseling. You still need antidepressant and pills. You still need to have friends and good relationships. And by the way, I had a very great talk with a person who worked with the autism spectrum children. He invented smart glasses that help to improve emotions. And even he said that though I invented this stuff, I make money on this stuff. But I would love to say that there are two more important things that this technology. First is to build plan for your life. When you pick your job you love, girlfriend you love, build your family, you build your plan and go to this plan every day. So autism spectrum is a very comprehensive thing. Technology is just a simple tool, but it's really about you, how you deal with different elements of this puzzle in your relationships, in your learning, how you make fun, how you make joy in your life. And it's really about mentoring. They try to bring to the table as well. So I completely agree with David. By the way, I try to use meditation, and over the years, I tried different practices. I've been involved in sport, mostly Olympic weightlifting and CrossFit. At the same time, I was involved more other practices related to yoga and meditation. And definitely, it's very hard to immerse in these practices sometimes. Some people need some kind of drugs, pills, or a chemical help. Some people need technology. So once again, it's really about what you would love to get. Nikola mentioned that we're people, so we should be focused on experiences, not kind of a result. We're not machines. We would love to dance, to experience joy, to experience intimacy with our lovely ones. It's a kind of ritual. It's a kind of a joy process. It's a very complicated. What's why this still is a huge distance between AI and human being. Human being very unpredictable. It's very chaotic in some way, and it's a very interesting at the same time. And technology, it's just a part of this puzzle. And I see it even in my very concrete work. It's the same what my colleagues just mentioned. Thank you.
Martin, we can't hear you.
Hello?
Okay,
Martin?
so I'll try again. You couldn't read my lips, I see. Well, I would like to thank you all very much for your contributions into this session, for sharing your ideas and thoughts and experiences. And at the end of this session, I would like to point on the next conferences. Next would be at 4 o'clock a session on emergent technologies, AI and ethics, with a keynote by, oh, I don't know who is there. It's Nikola then. Yes, okay, with by Nikola Danaylov. And at 8 o'clock this evening on social media competence and communication in times of crisis. And on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock on leadership in crisis. So thank you all very much. Have a nice Saturday evening, a nice rest of the weekend. And see you maybe in the next session. Bye.
Thank you, guys. This was fantastic. Have a lovely weekend. Looking forward to the next talks. Bye.
See you in 30 minutes.
Yes.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.